Correct. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the GoldFish Report. I'm your host, Louisa. Today is Monday, January 28th, 2019. This is our weekly GoldFish Report. This is our weekly POTUS Report, week 106. Waiting to see if the president is really draining the swamp. And I don't know, Jim. Of course, with me to present this is our friend Jim Fetzer. Thanks for being here, Jim.
Louise, it's profoundly troubling to say, but there's increasing evidence that the Democrats actually are engaged in a plot to assassinate the president, to remove Mike Pence, to make Nancy Pelosi president so she can have Hillary appointed as vice president, at which point she will resign. And I say this with a heavy heart, but the evidence is growing, as I shall explain today.
I hear you, Jim, and I saw that tweet that Donna Brazile tweeted, and it was very ominous, as if they were like activating some sort of, plan. And I have to say, okay, so here we go. We started out with, Nancy Pelosi saying that she rescinded her invitation for the State of the Union address because of the government shutdown. And I have to tell you, what did President Trump do? He pulls out his Trump card and he opens up the government. Look, I have to tell you, I have to have some optimism, because it's so damn dark that if we don't, man, we're all just going to jump off a long pier,
He is some kind of political genius, Louisa. I'm convinced. Long since convinced.
So we have 2.5 weeks to go on this, right? Has Nancy Pelosi now, because the government is reopened, has she sent a new invitation, Jim? I haven't seen one.
No, it's going to be slow in coming, because she's trying to assert authority as though she were an equal of the president. That's the whole idea, to give her the persona of someone on a par, so that her elevation to that high office has been prepped psychologically.
Right. So here we have, the president, before he reopened the government, said he was willing to, just when he gave those DACA concessions, he said he wasn't conceding, but okay, let's just say compromise, okay? Extended the DACA protection, right? And then he said that we're putting together a bipartisan committee, a bipartisan group of people to get this done. So now they have this bipartisan group of Democrats and Republicans to now sit down and work out. They have 2.5 weeks left now, Jim, to work out some kind of agreement to reopen the government. Will they do it without declaring a national emergency? Folks, I just wanted to bring to your attention really quick. Last week I did a bullet points presentation, and this was important because it focused on hold on, let me screen share this for you real quick. It focused on this issue of the furlough. Here it is, okay? The GoldFish Report bullet points: furlough, RIF, and senior executive services. Is this a POTUS master move by, having this whole government shutdown, having the furlough? And I have to tell you have to watch this report. It's really good. And of course, what we're doing with the bullet points presentations, because it's all a very academic review, so it's very time consuming, is the first half is on YouTube for free, or BitChute for free, and then you can go to Vimeo, and if you want to get more analysis of it, you can go there, and to help support the channel, you can pay a small amount or rent it or whatever to see the rest of it. And that's really how we keep the reports going on this channel. But this is interesting, Jim, because as I went through this report, it is like, these are bureaucrats. These are very difficult people to fire, especially when you get to the senior executive service level. There's like no firing these people, because there's always, if you watch the report, you'll understand why. The only thing that I didn't go into detail about, and I'll do a new bullet point presentation about, is really when it comes to, and we always focus on the bullet points, we always focus on presidential powers. And so this next one will focus on what happens, what's within the president's scope under presidential powers when it comes to now declaring a national emergency. What does that mean? And we will go into more detail about that. And I also wanted to say, because it has been challenged by court rulings, the whole national emergency, there has been issues regarding that, and I think they do want to avoid it, although there technically still is a declared state of emergency ever since the Patriot Act, Jim. I think it's just been renewed. So we technically do have a state of national emergency. but not in the way, not in the official way that or more, I think, overt
Well,
way.
he's talking about declaring a specific emergency at the border to justify
Yeah.
expenditure of funds from sources that would not normally be available for that purpose were it not declared to be an emergency.
Well, he's calling about, yeah,
it's a limited scope or limited purpose declaration we're talking about.
Well, I'm not so sure. I'll look into it. I'll check on that, because a national emergency, it would, again, I mean, it's all in how you write it, how you craft it, like you're saying, a very specific, limited, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. But it does give the president the ability to declare martial law, which could be used to execute these 70,000 sealed indictments, Jim. So that's where I'm going with that. As everybody knows, so they're really looking this week. I know
that's actually very interesting, Louisa. Yes. That the cover could be for a broader purpose, a broader scope. I like that. That's very interesting.
Well, Jim,
not to assume it's the case, but
yes,
it's very interesting as a prospect.
Right. And we've got those 70,000 sealed indictments, and we had, from what I had seen, it was like over 100,000, 130, 150,000, that were not sealed, unsealed indictments. They were, overt. This is like huge, this amount. But, we still want to see it. It's not really palpable in my immediate reality around me. Like the state I live in still has massive amount of corruption. I like to see that resolved. What concerns me is that, okay, they're trying to put, I do foresee this at some point, this over time, because it will take, if they go into this RIF, it will take time, a reduction in force. If we go back onto closing the government down, and they go back and they try to do this through a RIF, right? It's going to take a year to fire all those people, because they have appeal processes. It's a very lengthy process, and they go through kind of like a seniority kind of decision making. So there's going to be many challenges, and there's, the whole thing is that this is the beauty of it, Jim. For the 35 days the government was shut down, all the agencies who were affected, and even the ones who weren't, because there could be pressure and overflow on other agencies, they're all going to submit reports on how well they functioned, how well everything ran with a reduced workforce. And when that comes in, that people basically adjusted to this. There wasn't, aside from people who obviously were missing salaries, but in terms of the function of the government, you have to realize any CEO, which Trump is, any CEO has to make a decision on whether the workforce they have is actually necessary to accomplish the goals. Because what was happening was, as we saw in that Project Veritas video, we had people who were deliberately slowing down the process, deliberately slow tracking the bills, and just getting the bills out or getting things done in Congress, for the government, not in Congress specifically, but I meant in terms of, there's a lot of agencies involved in working with the government and the committees and getting bills introduced, and there's a lot involved. It's a huge government, and of course Trump wants to reduce the size of government. So they're going to submit their reports, and and I'll tell you, Jim, they're going to be like, we had no problem functioning on this, level of employees. The reduction in staff, the ones who were there were able to be more productive, because the people who sabotaged the productivity, they were gone. They weren't at work. We're going to find that this is what's going to happen. This is the beauty of the whole thing. And so I'm sorry, but there's no guaranteed jobs. You'll get whatever I believe they will be offered some sort of severance package. They will probably retain some benefits if they paid into a retirement. They'll still have that, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, Jim, nobody, even tenured professors, it's very hard. I mean, a tenured professor, that's really an earned position. You know what I mean? But still, you could see, like with James Tracy, I mean, politics can play a role, and they can fire a tenured professor, which it doesn't happen very often. But it's not really the same comparison. But what I'm trying to say is that the reports are going to come in, and they're going to reveal a lot about how much waste there is in the government. And if we don't need all these positions, we don't need all these people doing things, and the ones who were really productive, who were there, who really got things done, those are the ones who are going to stay. If we only need, like, why would you pay Jim, why would anybody pay for salary and benefits for, 50,000 people or 100,000 people if you don't have the work for them, if you have no work for them? So this is what's going to happen. I think this is what's going to come out of it. We're going to find that the government was far more effective in a reduced capacity because the people who were really productive were the ones who were there and they were able to get the work done. So anyway, so I think there's got to be a good faith compromise at this point from the Democrats if they want to take this seriously, or the or the government's going to be shut down again in 2.5 weeks. I also wanted to say that the former Starbucks CEO, Schultz, has announced that he's going to run for president as a centrist independent. And I think it's kind of funny because here we have yesterday Kamala Harris, who for the Democrat Party of California had a big rally to introduce her candidacy for the Democrat nomination. They're trying to offer, free college, free healthcare, Medicaid for all, and things like that. And although I'm not going to get into debating each of these topics because there's a lot of issues, but even this former Starbucks CEO says that's not even sustainable, not even practical. And also, they're proposing like these huge tax cuts on the most wealthy. And since they've all been accepting bribes and now have all become multi-millionaires, that includes them. It's like, are you kidding me? It's just kind of keeps backfiring on them. And then, so look, I think that we're going to see this week we're seeing as it unfolds, we saw how the mainstream media was baited. We saw with this Stone, I'm sorry, what was his first name?
Oliver?
You saw the...
Roger
Stone. I'm sure you have it in your slides.
Yeah, that's a big story.
You have it in your slides. So anyway.
The guy's a friend of mine.
Oh, for goodness sakes. So look, that's unbelievable what happened. I'll wait. I'm sure you have it in your slides, right, Jim?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll wait to comment on that there. No new Q posts, folks. So, just remember Q is really kind of like a psyop on the deep state. So, they're kind of, it's kind of causing a lot of anxiety for them, and as you can see with the layoffs of all the mass media, from the big companies, it's really going to be their undoing what they did with this BuzzFeed article, and it really flew back in their face, just like how CNN suddenly. How did they know? Oh, his intuition. Well, now we have psychic reporters, Jim. How do you like that? We have psychic reporters, at CNN, right? So
unencumbered by facts and evidence, logic and reasoning.
Of course, exactly. Totally psychic reporters. That's the kind that we like to have.
They can intuit the truth.
That's what he said. He had this intuition. So I wanted to just, before I hand this over to Jim, I wanted to pay tribute to a fellow YouTuber and truther who has passed away recently. We wanted to wish our condolences to, his name is Tony Diaz, but he went by Captain Max Steele. He he passed away over the weekend due to complications and long hospital stay for some health issues. He really was a great storyteller. I'll tell you, we're going to miss his stories. He was special operations in the U.S. Army, retired veteran, and he will be missed very much. And I know that there was a lot of people. Here's a lot of tributes on his page here. It was not expected. This wasn't like from a long illness or anything, but he will definitely be missed. And of course, this is the post that I had left for him. And this is the obituary. If people want to see it, this is where it will be available if anyone's interested in sending well wishes or even contributions. You can email GoldFish Report and I can find, I have a PayPal address I'll post a PayPal address in the description section to his wife if anyone wants to help contribute with expenses, because there's, she's Canadian, and so the whole American system here is just totally new to her, and she's getting some help. But could always use some help to not have to worry about those kinds of financial things at this time, if you're inclined to do that. So we bid a farewell to our friend Max, and he will be sorely missed, but we will always remember him in good spirit. And because, of course, we interviewed Max many times on the GoldFish Report. He had some really funny stories about Area 51 and some interesting things that go on there. And like I said, he will be missed. So to everybody who's familiar with him, this was just a little token in memory of Max. And I may end up doing a little bit more in a separate report, just in memory of Max. But anyway, I'm going to hand this over to Jim. We've got a lot to talk about, Jim. Thanks for your patience.
Well, thank you, Louisa, and I'm sorry about the demise of such a dear friend. The whole business about the wall has been so bizarre when we have all these interviews, statements from the past by Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Barack Obama, even Hillary Clinton about the importance of border security and controlling illegal immigration, that there's good reason to believe there's something more going on here. We may now have found it. Gateway Pundit has reported Mexican cartels paid off the Mexican president with $100 million. Former Democrat claims Democratic Party being paid millions by cartels as well, and that would include the two leaders of the House and the Senate, respectively, on the Democratic side. While the Democrats are aggressively blocking the president's desire to protect Americans to build a border wall, attempts to block the wall in spite of evidence it's needed indicate there are heretofore undisclosed reasons. In May 2016, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi visited the president of Mexico with other congressmen, including little-known Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke. Pelosi stated about the meetings, "We come here as a bipartisan and large delegation to express our respect for the people of Mexico and the country of Mexico, to acknowledge our shared border and our shared values, and to learn more about how we can work together for the bright future, not only for our two countries, but for our hemisphere." Pelosi said the delegation had had a busy time in Mexico City. When we arrived, we had our country team briefings. We had the privilege, some of us, of going to Mass in the cathedral and hearing the sermon on Labor Day on the importance of workers in Mexico, a view we shared. We've met with members of the American Chamber of Commerce. We had the privilege of hearing from members of the civil society here in Mexico. We had a very beneficial meeting with Director General Zapata on the subject of the economy and the TPP, that's a Trans-Pacific Partnership. And then we had a glorious meeting of really very thorough exchange of subjects and views about our shared values and our shared border with the President of Mexico. Just now we finished a lunch, as you know, with members of the federal deputies, Mexican federal deputies and senators, and this evening we'll have a dinner meeting with a foreign minister. Who knows what all the discussions entailed, but since this date, the Mexican president has been aligned with the Mexican cartels. As reported earlier this month, he's accused of taking millions from the cartels. Former Mexican President Enrique Peña Nieto accepted a $100 million bribe from drug cartel kingpin Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. A witness has testified. Alex Cifuentes, who said he was a close associate of Guzman for years, told a New York City courtroom that he had told authorities of the bribe in 2016. Guzman is accused of being behind the Sinaloa drug cartel, which prosecutors say is the largest U.S. drug supplier. Mr. Peña Nieto served as a president of Mexico from 2012 to 2018. Guzman, 61, has been on trial in Brooklyn since November after he was extradited from Mexico to face charges of trafficking cocaine, heroin, and other drugs as leader of what the U.S. has called the world's largest drug cartel. The timing of former Mexican president being connected with Mexican cartels is rather significant. A former Democrat believes the real reason Democrats don't want a wall is related to the story above, to wit that they're receiving massive bribes. Here you have Pelosi claiming Trump is in bed with the Russians, despite all evidence to the contrary. However, it does appear there's more evidence of Pelosi being in bed with the Mexican cartels. Perhaps this is why she adamantly doesn't want a wall. Let's hope that if it is in fact true, that we find the truth behind the Mexican cartel Democrat connection sooner rather than later. Frankly, I believe this explains a lot. I believe this explains a lot, because the position is so absurd politically to take a stance against a wall when it's in the interests of the American people, where the lack of the wall does represent a threat to our national security, and where Pelosi, Schumer, and others have all taken strong stances against illegal immigration and in favor of border security, that it requires an explanation. I believe we may have found it here. Not only that, but here we have down in Brazil's cryptic President Pelosi tweet and rumors of a plot to assassinate Trump. Madam Speaker, today, President Pelosi, shortly thereafter, MLK weekend is underway. Keep hope alive. I'm very, very troubled that this may be a plot that is afoot. Look at this. We even have wanted for treason posters parallel to those distributed in Dallas before the assassination of JFK. This is part of a psyop to lay a foundation for the assassination, so the American people will not be surprised when it takes place and start to ask themselves what is going on. Not only that, but when you have a conspiracy, it exists when you simply agree to undertake a project, but typical prosecutors won't pursue it until there are steps taken in furtherance of the conspiracy, and I submit we have one right here. House Speaker holds public bill signings to compete with Trump. President Pelosi, does House Speaker Nancy Pelosi want America to think she's the president? Pelosi holding public bill signings in front of news cameras, an optic usually reserved for the president. The latest example came Friday when she signed the continuing resolution to end the partial shutdown. I tell you, that is what is going on here, Louisa. I am convinced. Mute.
Sorry, Jim. Yeah, it looks like that was the plan, and I just don't think that they're going to succeed. I did hear about another plan that there were people who were actually arrested. So I did hear reports of arrests in D.C., people who were involved in some kind of attack during it was a planned attack, I think, during the State of the Union address. So I don't know, it's kind of mixed, but I have reported at least 3 assassination attempts that my sources have claimed on the president's life. I mean, this is...
Louisa, there have been 14.
I'm sure there's more than that. I'm just saying.
Well, I'm telling you, there have been 14 attempts on his life. This is not a question in dispute.
Oh, I'm not disputing it. I'm just saying that I personally have, this man is definitely, they're trying to take him out, and, JFK style. And I don't think it's going to, I don't think they're going to succeed, but they're desperate, Jim. They're desperate.
Yeah, this is a psyop. They're laying the foundation, Louisa. It's outrageous, but look, it's taking place now.
Yeah.
Here we have the very interesting situation. Trump associate Roger Stone arrested on 7 counts, including lying to Congress and special counsel Robert Mueller's probe. Now, there were many bizarre aspects to this. They had 17 vehicles, some 27 SWAT members who were armed to the teeth invading his home, where Roger Stone, around 3:30 in the morning, where Roger Stone resides with his deaf wife, his 2 dogs, and his 3 cats. It was completely unnecessary that this should take place. Nevertheless, remarkably enough, CNN was there. Were they tipped off ahead of the Stone arrest? Obviously, it's preposterous, anything else. CNN producer admits he was waiting outside Roger Stone's house an hour before the arrest. And he said it was just serendipitous. It just occurred to me in these early morning hours that something might be going on at the home of Roger Stone. I'm telling you, this is a grotesque indication of consciousness of guilt. It's so blatant. Roger was very masterful when he came out and spoke after he was released from jail on bail. Now, when you have an armed SWAT team, attack, that would imply that they believe that the person they're arresting is violent. But Roger's anything but violent. He owns no guns. He's never offered any threat. He would have been glad to come and turn himself in if they simply made a phone call.
Yeah.
Here now, he's released on a $250,000 recognizance bail. In other words, all he had to do was sign his name to gain his release. This is completely grotesque. And here you have Alan Dershowitz, who's been completely brilliant on constitutional issues in relation to the Trump administration, pointing out that all of the crimes with which Roger Stone is accused are process crimes. In other words, crimes that arose from the course of the investigation by Robert Mueller. None of them trace back to the original issue he was supposed to be investigating, having to do with Russian hacking. Mm-hmm. These are lying to Mueller, lying to Congress, or doing something since Mueller initiated his investigation. In other words, they have no substance. They have no bearing on the Russian indictment. And yet, insultingly enough, you find commentators for CNN and the major networks claiming this is conclusive proof that that's what was going on. Indeed, I was on Press TV, The Debate, which is a very fine program, with a fellow by name of Carl Unger. Now, Carl Unger, and this was a half-an-hour debate. Carl Unger is the author of the book House of Trump, House of Putin, where he's attempting to make the case, and as he actually asserted during our debate, that Donald Trump is a Russian asset in the White House. It was disgraceful. I took him apart from the beginning to the end. I had 4 opportunities to speak, but get this, Louisa. Deep State was aware this was going on. It was arranged for me to go to a studio that gave them opportunity to react, so that, although I've done 100 interviews on Press TV and never before had this happen, there was a 15-second delay from the time I was asked a question to the time I heard it and was able to respond. Plus, there was noise introduced for all of my answers, though not for his and not for the host. This was clearly sabotage by the Deep State. Now, I have had the program transcribed. There's a brilliant transcript. You can find it on my blog. Press TV, Jim Fetzer versus Carl Unger on Roger Stone and the Russia hoax. And I make point after point after point about how this is completely absurd. And here you have Nancy Pelosi, and I tell you again, this is a further move in the plot to take out Trump. What does Putin have on the president, says Nancy Pelosi? The indictment of Roger Stone, she claims, make it clear that there was a deliberate, coordinated attempt by top Trump campaign officials to influence the 2016 election and subvert the will of the American people, which is completely false. As I've explained, the indictment of Roger Stone had nothing to do with Russia or hacking. In fact, we've disproven it. Greg Jarrett has a brilliant book about it called The Russia Hoax. I go through all the evidence that, in fact, the emails were downloaded by the IT guy for the DNC, Seth Rich, with the help of Kim.com, how there was confirmation from our leading cybersecurity experts, including Bill Benny, who actually confirmed it to me on my own radio show, The Raw Deal, personally. So this is all complete nonsense. Pelosi continues, it's staggering that the president has chosen to surround himself with people who violated the integrity of our democracy and lied to the FBI and Congress about it. In the face of 37 indictments, the president's continued actions to undermine the special counsel investigation raises the question, what does Putin have on the president politically, personally, or financially? Why has the Trump administration continued to discuss pulling the U.S. out of NATO, which would be a massive victory for Putin? But as I've explained, NATO has long outlived its usefulness. It's no longer fulfilling a defensive role. It was created in the old days to thwart what was feared to be a threat from the then Soviet Union. There's no longer a Soviet Union. Russia wants peace. I tell you, this is another act in furtherance of the conspiracy by Nancy Pelosi. I submit.
Right. Well, look, list of people who lied to Congress who have not been arrested and who did not have raids on their house: Hillary, Obama, Comey, McCabe, Lynch, Strzok, Page, Rice, Brennan, or Clapper. Where's the SWAT team? You know, why isn't the SWAT team? And this just shows the public, again, it shows the public that this is not the Democrat Party, this is the communist fascist party. And they have to realize that it's been hijacked, it's been infiltrated, because these people are not look at Venezuela. Oh, that's another issue, which we'll talk about. But socialism doesn't work, folks.
They ought to rename themselves the Un-American Party, because they're a disgrace. They're sabotaging the Constitution of the United States, thwarting the will of the American people. Donald Trump was a democratically elected president of the United States. Every American has the obligation to acknowledge his role and to follow his lead as our president. In fact, even studies by the University of Minnesota and Boston University confirmed that Trump prevailed over Clinton because of voters in rural counties in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, and Michigan, and Wisconsin that had suffered high casualties from the Middle East war, who voted for him not with certainty, but in the belief that he was less likely of the two candidates to continue this, and of course taking the steps to pull us out of Syria and to even reduce our forces in Afghanistan are a move in the right direction. And I think that's causing a panic attack on the part of those who are opposed to him. The Democratic Party has now become the party of war, Louisa. They used to criticize Trump for being engaged in the war, and then when he pulls us out, they attack him even more viciously. It's an obscenity.
Well, as you say in your book, Jim, I mean, this was a coup d'etat when they took Kennedy out, and they have been infiltrating through. And look, folks, when I talked about senior executive services, this is how they do this. They keep a group of executives who stay at very high levels of either just under the cabinet level and also in high-level positions in corporations, the corporations that affect us every day, and such as the healthcare companies, the drug manufacturing companies, the food manufacturing companies, the agricultural industry. So these people go through this revolving door through the senior executive services, and this is how they have this is why it was so important to include them in this bullet points report that I did, because this is how these are bureaucrats that you just can't get rid of. But there is a way, and I think that POTUS, knows what that is, and we're going to look deeper into that in the next bullet points presentation, Jim. But it has to stop. We have to stop allowing this revolving door of people being in senior FDA positions who then go to be CEOs at the pharmaceutical companies, do their fancy footwork there, they get their bonuses, they get their big payouts, then they go back to the doors open. They go back into the senior executive services, into the position of an FDA, again, to control the agenda. Folks, we lost, we really kind of did. In many ways, we lost control of the country. It was supposed to be a country of the people, by the people, and we lost it. So Trump is here trying to fix this, and we better be paying attention this time. Right, Jim?
Yes. I do agree.
It's over, Jim, if we don't, it's over.
Now we have the threats going on in Venezuela. The U.S. is out to bring about regime change. The evidence for this is simply overwhelming. According to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, the impetus for Washington's sudden interest in Venezuela was the suffering of the Venezuelan people. Where have we heard that before? The suffering of the Iraqi people, the suffering of the Syrian people, bringing democracy and freedom to the Middle East when Syria is a democracy, when Bashar al-Assad is a democratically elected president of Syria supported by 80% of the population there. Reuters, in their article called "Pompeo Calls on Venezuela's Maduro to Step Down, Urges Support from Military," would claim, he said Washington would support opposition leader Juan Guaido as he establishes a transitional government and prepares the country for elections. The Venezuelan people have suffered long enough under Nicolas Maduro's disastrous dictatorship. We call on Maduro to step aside in favor of a legitimate leader reflecting the will of the Venezuelan people. Notice the parallels here, by the way, to the Democrats wanting Trump to stand aside so that we can have a leader who is a legitimate, who is supposed to be Hillary Clinton. And by the way, I not only mentioned how the studies have shown that Trump prevailed over Hillary because of differences over Middle East, but Richard Charnon, who's a brilliant statistician who's published 2 books on the theft of elections using electronic voting machine, has found Hillary did not even win the popular vote. That's another myth, that actually Trump won the popular vote by millions. So virtually every argument the Democrats have given against Trump turns out to be ill-founded and false.
Yeah.
In truth, Washington's motivation is the fact that according to the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, Venezuela has the largest proven oil reserves on earth, more than Saudi Arabia, accounting for nearly a quarter of all OPEC production. Coincidence? Venezuela green lights Russia to mine gold. Days later, U.S. attempts to overthrow. This is another fascinating aspect over and beyond the The black gold or oil is the real gold. The decades-long U.S. infatuation with Venezuela came to a head on Wednesday as the United States, Canada, Brazil, and others all declared a man who never even ran for the office of presidency, much less got elected as the president of Venezuela. This is absurd beyond belief. On Wednesday, Juan Guaido Martinez took a public oath of office and swore himself in as the president of Venezuela. He assumed the office with zero democratic process, essentially making himself a dictator, was immediately declared legitimate by Washington. Once again, how is this support for democracy when they're subverting the democratic process? This guy has never even run for office. The coup in Venezuela must be resisted. Craig Murray. Now, it's interesting Craig Murray wrote this piece because when Seth Rich downloaded the files from the DNC with the help of Kim.com, they were transmitted to Julian Assange by way of Craig Murray, who was the UK ambassador to Uzbekistan. So Craig Murray has been an instrument for exposing the deep state. Venezuela has elections. Juan Guaido has never even been a presidential candidate, despite massive CIA opposition funding and interference over years as big oil tries to regain control of the world's largest oil reserves. Nicolas Maduro was democratically reelected in 2018 as the president of Venezuela. The coup now underway is illegitimate. I oppose Maduro's move to replace the elected National Assembly. Sometimes I read back things I wrote in the past and decide I was wrong. Sometimes I think the article was right, but a bit of a potboiler. Occasionally I am proud, as I am proud of my analysis of Venezuela written on 3 August 2017, which he reiterates. It's a very fascinating study that the UK recognized a government that had effective control of the government, of the territory, whatever the attributes of that government. It's a well-established principle of international law, rare exceptions involving continuing to support ousted governments. He's going through the history here to demonstrate this is outrageous. And get this, Trump bashing Iraq war architect Elliot Abrams to lead U.S. regime change in Venezuela. This guy, Louisa, is a deep state neocon. He's a disgusting person. I am outraged that Trump has given him any role here. This is a colossal blunder. Washington seems so dead set on regime change in Venezuela. The State Department has just appointed a former diplomat with a sordid track record in Latin America and the Middle East to spearhead restoring America, restoring democracy in Caracas. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced on Friday the appointment of Elliot Abrams to help the Venezuelan people fully restore democracy and prosperity to their country. Abrams is expected to coordinate all diplomatic efforts to replace President Nicolas Maduro with the self-proclaimed President Juan Guaido, recognized by the United States, Organization of American States, and several EU members. The U.S. has ordered non-emergency embassy staff to leave Venezuela in the anticipation of things heating up. The United States on Thursday declared non-emergency embassy staff to leave Venezuela, but refused to comply with a full expulsion ordered by Nicolas Maduro, who Washington says is no longer president. Get this now, fascinating. Russia sends security contractors to Venezuela to protect Maduro. As the international community splits along government who continue to back and battle Venezuelan ruler Nicolas Maduro and governments led by the U.S., who have officially recognized opposition leader Juan Guaido as the country's legitimate head of states, Reuters reported a group of Russian mercenaries with ties to the Kremlin. These would be private armies. These are like Z or Academy or Blackwater or others that have been involved in U.S. efforts in the Middle East. So calling them mercenaries is in fact accurate, but that's not to imply that the United States hasn't been using mercenaries all along. They are being paid 10 to 100 times what U.S. forces are being paid in the Middle East. It's another disgrace. A group of Russian mercenaries with ties to Kremlin have been sent to Venezuela to provide security for Maduro as he struggles with the biggest threat to his rule in his 6 years in power. Notice here you have a map. The green is supporting Maduro, the purple supporting Guaido, the green is supporting Guaido, who's a usurper, the purple supporting Maduro, who's the elected president, and then the orange calling for dialogue. The contractors, I believe, from the Wagner Group, private contractors who performed secret missions on behalf of the government, including fighting in Syria and the Ukraine, which brings to mind this incident from last February when U.S.-backed forces killed 100 Russian mercenaries in what was the closest thing to a direct proxy conflict between Russia and the U.S. and Syria. It's unclear when the contractors arrive or when they intend to leave. Russia has offered to mediate the conflict between Maduro and Guaido while joining with China to criticize the U.S. for interfering in Venezuelan affairs. Well, what else does the U.S. do but intervene in the affairs of other nations with coups, assassinations, and the like, Louisa? It's our history. It's what we're known for.
Okay, I agree. I think it's the deep state element within the government that's doing this. And I think because they keep it so compartmentalized within the government that you don't really know the whole backstory. Like each department doesn't know the backstory or what the ultimate plan is and the ultimate agenda. So our servicemen are told we're there to liberate. I mean, when they get there, they find out a completely different story. And these men are very, disenfranchised. Well, let me just tell you what Benjamin Fulford's saying about this move in Venezuela. And just take it for what, use your own discernment, folks. But, he says the battle for planet Earth is intensifying as the satanic ruling Western cabal is cornered, dangerous, and literally fighting for its life. The cabal are now fighting desperately to stay in power by stealing the oil reserves of Venezuela because they are doomed if they lose control of the financial system and thus their ability to hire protection. More and more whistleblowers are coming out and confirming, okay, so this is not related to Venezuela, but that's related to Venezuela. And we have to remember that when we talk about these countries and their movement, and we're talking about that there's a deep state faction within each government of the world, and they are related to the central bankers. It's all connected to the central banking system. And since we're changing the banking system, and we're changing the Fed, we're changing the whole banking system on the planet right now to a quantum financial computing system where you have a blockchain technology which prevents people from laundering and stealing money. This is the problem. They basically, and I have said this in previous reports, through BRICS, through the AIIB Bank, through the Alliance of BRICS, and through the new SIPS money transfer system, and it's all there to replace the Federal Reserve System. When Kennedy tried to print our own money, they took him out. And of course, there were, as you know, numerous other reasons to take him out, but that was one of the big ones. Anyone who tried to go against the Federal Reserve has had their country decimated. Okay, so this is the thing. But this is what Trump is trying to do. And when you see all these neocons, it concerns me gravely, like you said, Jim, that he has these neocons in his cabinet positions and advisory positions, and even Mueller. I'm hearing reports that Mueller is flipped and he's actually going to be, he's actually working with Trump. Is that true? I don't know. But we have yet to see what Mueller is really, what the fruits of his labors have been. We've seen little pieces of it, but we have seen nothing in terms of collusion with Trump. So that was the whole purpose of him being in there. But let's keep in mind that the central banking system, this is all connected to the same people. That's why the president had a tweeting war with the Rothschilds, because that's who's on the way down. So I tend to think that Benjamin Fulford's pretty correct in that assessment. And I tend to think that, when Trump is, as you said, very strategic, Jim, and when he keeps his friends close, he doesn't have to worry too much about his friends. He doesn't have to keep them quite as close, but he definitely needs to keep his enemies even closer. So when you see him having these neocons in the cabinet position, don't be too afraid. I think what he's doing is he's trying to watch what the neocons are doing by having them in his cabinet, by having them being watched very closely and carefully, and, kind of being able to play the game 10 steps ahead. You know what I'm saying? Being 10 steps ahead.
Part of their effort to demonize Iran, of course, they apprehended a world-famous anchor, Marzi Hashemi, who hosts programs on Press TV. I have been featured as a guest on programs she has hosted. I've admired her for a decade. She was born in the United States. She's an African-American born in New Orleans. Melanie Franklin was her born name. She married an Iranian. She's a dual U.S.-Iranian citizen. Her apprehension was completely disgusting. On a material witness warrant, Iran protested the arrest through the Swiss ambassador. Over a week after her detention at St. Louis Lambert Airport, U.S.-born journalist Marzi Hashemi, an anchor for Iran's Press TV, remains in federal custody despite never being charged with or accused of a crime. Iranian officials protested before on the matter on Tuesday, summoned the Swiss ambassador to protest the U.S. detention, demand her immediate release. Hashemi was in the U.S. visiting family and filming a Black Lives Matter documentary in St. Louis before her arrest. Officially, the U.S. says she's being detained under the material witness law, though there's no timetable. And in the past, the Justice Department has used this law to summarily detain people they don't have any evidence to charge with a crime. She was in court last Friday, due to be in court to testify a third time Wednesday. Wasn't clear what she's testifying about. Turns out, I'm convinced this whole thing was an effort to demonize Iran by requiring Press TV to register as a foreign agent under the Foreign Agents Registration Act of 1938. It's a disclosure statute that requires persons acting as agents of foreign principals in a political or quasi-political capacity to make periodic public disclosure of their relationship with a foreign principal, as well as activities, receipts, and disbursement in support of those activities. I'm convinced that's what this was all about. But because it's a disclosure statute, it has no applicability to Press TV, because every time they put up a video on YouTube about an interview done by Press TV, it states underneath, Press TV is in part or in whole funded by the Iranian government. So there's no secret about it. I think this was misconceived that John Bolton and this guy Mike Pompeo just had a mental blackout. They thought they could use the Foreign Agent Registration Act against Iran and Press TV when they could not. So it fell flat. They had her come in for several appearances and have now released her. Cast in light of the hysteria over alleged Russian interference in the 2016 election, Congress and various government agencies turned their attention to both outlets, claiming the need to provide listeners with notice as their partisan bent. In point of fact, FARA was used against Sputnik and RT so much as a legislative bully pulpit in a readily transparent effort to purify, if not control, the message of those two foreign-aimed outset. Now, that's a FARA, of course, is a Foreign Agents Registration Act. Sputnik News and RT, along with Press TV, are the three great international sources of news. They are highly reliable, highly accurate, very objective. Much more reliable than you can find from any media outlet in the United States, absent the alternative media. In neither cases were journalists of those networks, that's Sputnik or RT, seized by the government for possible violation of FARA. In neither case were the networks targeted for grand jury investigation. In fact, unlike here, both media outlets were given ample opportunity to raise objections to the applicability of FARA to their activities, and when the governments proved unavailing, a chance to either register or cease operations within the U.S. Failing this, the government threatened but did not at any time undertake criminal prosecutions or arrest of employees, let alone journalists who work for the outlets. I'm convinced this happened because Bibi Netanyahu, frustrated over U.S. pulling out of Syria, wanted further demonization of Iran. I'm willing to infer it was Bibi who suggested to Pompeo and Bolton that this be done. Probably when Bolton came to visit Tel Aviv recently and then visited Turkey on his recent tour of the Middle East. Now the U.S. government has released without charge Press TV anchor Marzi Hashemi after 10 days of illegal detention. Scott Bennett, among others, where Scott is a former U.S. Army Intel and PSYOPs officer, but many, many others. At least 16 authorities on international events have been interviewed on Press TV. This has given a colossal black eye to the United States. It's completely outrageous and makes us look like a bunch of stumbling bumpkins. In fact, if Donald Trump was involved in this decision, well, I fervently hope he was not, because it was such a colossal blunder. Then the big three in U.S. foreign policy, Pompeo, Bolton, and Trump, turn out to be the three stooges of international politics. It's embarrassing, Louisa. It's embarrassing beyond belief.
Light off. Well, you know what, Jim? It's kind of like, sorry, I have this light in my eyes. I got to move this. Okay, sorry about that. Just like with what happened with Roger Stone. I mean, you know, Trump. It's like there's an element of the FBI. Obviously, the FBI was tipped off. You know, had tipped CNN off. So you know, it's kind of like whoever was involved in that was trying to. I think they were trying to provoke the Trump administration. They're trying to provoke people. This is a provocation. I don't, you know what I'm saying? To kind of come out and I think it's, you know, it's just the war that we're in right now, this propaganda war. But, you know, as we see from BuzzFeed, you know, they're falling on their own swords when they do things like this. They fall on their own swords.
It's fascinating. BuzzFeed and Huffington Post are having to make massive cuts to their staffs.
Cool.
Now the Covington Catholic boys are going to the White House. This was another outrage. Laura Ingraham revealed Tuesday the Covington Catholic students threatened by the leftist internet mob will be meeting with Donald Trump at the White House as early as tomorrow. The Covington Catholic high school students were subjected to doxing and threats of violence after they peacefully fended off their confronters, including the Black Hebrew Israelites, who taunted them viciously, and a Native activist named Nathan Phillips near the Lincoln Memorial at the March for Life. This Nathan Phillips turns out to be a scurrilous character. A round-the-clock mega movement operation exposed the truth of what really happened during the incident and pulled back the layers of deception the media uses to concoct false narratives for Democrats and establishment political gain. Now they have the chance to clear their names and to tell Trump firsthand about the conditions of intimidation that exist for him and Trump supporters around the country. There's a video of this Native activist, Nathan Phillips, but no conclusive evidence how Eastern Michigan University students supposedly harassed him with racist slurs when he approached them in 2015. This guy has a history. Native activists who arrest Catholic teens identified as actor from 2020 Skillex video about attacking Nathan Phillips. The Native American radical activist who confronted the MAGA hat wearing Catholic teens at March for Life starred in a 2020 Skillex video called Making It Bum Dem, in which Phillips does some spiritual warfare connected to a violent attack on the police officer. A police officer. Phillips was identified as a star of the video in his speaker's bio for tribal hemp and cannabis education and discussed his role in a 2017 interview. The prof has gone, this is insane. An Ivy League professor has bashed the smiling face of whiteness in response to the recent controversy involving an interaction between a Native American man and a Catholic teenage supporter of President Trump. Whiteness endlessly forgives its own transgressions. University of Pennsylvania Associate Professor Ebony Elizabeth Thomas wrote on Sunday about the confrontation between Covington Catholic High School student Nick Sandman and Native American Nathan Phillips. It rarely, if ever, gives those of us it harms and maims and kills time to process our emotions. She teaches at UPenn's Graduate School of Education. She's a Black American. This is simply absurd. According to Thomas, a smiling face of whiteness is one that always hides a knife behind its back. I mean, this is just disgraceful that this woman should be making these statements and attacking people for being white. They were perfectly responsible young men. They didn't respond. Thomas explains her reasoning for not sharing the highly circulated video of the confrontation, because when you look at the whole thing, you find they were the ones who were being taunted. If you get away from the couple of minute clip that the mainstream media has endlessly repeated, you see the whole scenario was exactly the opposite of how it's been portrayed. Noting that out of respect and solidarity, she does not wish to reinforce visual trauma. What that means is she doesn't want to reveal the whole thing as a scam, and that what she herself has had has been a disgrace, a falsehood based on impressions that have no substance. The tweets came on the same weekend. Much of the mainstream media jumped to negative conclusions about the Covington students after seeing a 2-minute video clip circulating on social media. What many reporters missed was a key context that was offered in 2 hours of additional footage. The added footage shows Phillips approaching the boys, not the other way around, just before the moment that went viral. A number of reporters later apologized for jumping to conclusions. At the time of publication, Thomas had yet to do the same. And believe me, she never will. John Cass, a very nice piece, Thought Crimes, Media Abuse, and Those Catholic High School Boys for Covington, I have it on my blog. I encourage others to go there to jamesfetzer.org, where I publish the latest, the best articles and blogs I can find about current events, Louisa.
Jim, this is so disgraceful. You know, it's just so sad that this is the propaganda mind control machine. It's so sad that people fall for this, that they fall for the fact that this is social engineering at its best. The way to succeed at this is you first demoralize people. This has been happening to get to the point that we're at right now, and people actually even falling for it, like with this law in New York State to allow late-term abortions and things of this nature. This is such a disgrace, but we didn't get here overnight. They worked on this incrementally over many decades, Jim, to demoralize us, to use that political correctness as a Trojan horse, to start breaking down our culture, our beliefs, our national pride, our national identity. That's what they're doing. They're destroying our national identity, and diversity is our identity, but not this.
That's right. That's right, Louisa. They're playing identity politics, which has become the staple of the Democratic movement today. They have destroyed the party. They represent political correctness and the Trump derangement syndrome. That is the core of the Democratic Party. It's a pro-war, anti-security, un-American party. I never took seriously the idea that it was a communist movement, but in effect, it is a communist movement today.
Yeah, communazis. It's so disgraceful. But you know what? Have faith, folks, because you know what's happening? Ruth Bader Ginsburg, there's so many reports she's dead and on ice right now. They're waiting for the president to finally schedule the State of the Union, probably at least this, if not something else. They know they're holding that as an ace so that they can delay that, because they know what the president's going to talk about. So the president's supposed to also announce, his intention for major changes within the government, from what my reports are saying. But also Justice Kennedy. So he's going to have to replace Ruth Bader Ginsburg once they officially announce that she's passed away. Because we saw that Fox accidentally, there's no accident, right? Fox accidentally put her obituary kind of thing on the front page. Everybody caught that. We know she's dead. So they're
I don't understand about Justice Kennedy, Louisa. What are you talking about?
Justice Kennedy is expected to
Well,
another.
he has retired. He's already been replaced.
I'm sorry. Then it's not Kennedy.
Gorsuch. Ginsburg is the one who's retired. You're thinking about another member of the court who's stepping down beyond Ginsburg?
Yes, there's going to be another member that he's going to be replacing. Why did I say Kennedy? I'm just thinking it was. I'm not sure.
Was Kavanaugh replaced Kennedy?
Right. Now I realize I misspoke. That's what I'm saying. I'm just trying to think of who was the other one.
The point is, Louisa, if it turns out that she dies or is dead or is determined to be dead before the State of the Union, then there's a sensational event for him to discuss.
Right.
Another appointment to the Supreme Court. And of course, that's all the more reason the Democrats have gone completely stark raving mad. And I say this emphatically, the Democrats have gone stark raving mad.
Right. I mean, I misspoke. It's not Kennedy. It's another one. But the point is, Trump's going to have control of the Supreme Court. And what's going to happen? They'll overturn Roe versus Wade. So this sickness of, whether you agree with it or not, I'm just saying that this is a possibility. How on earth can the people of New York, can someone just go shake them and wake them up?
I have debated endlessly about Roe v. Wade. I maintain it's one of the wisest decisions ever made by the Supreme Court. That New York may be doing something more extreme is wrong, because according to Roe v. Wade, in the third trimester, any abortion for other than save the life or health of the mother is murder. So it's already the case that third-term abortions, other than to save the life or health of the murderer, for example, because you don't prefer the sex of the unborn, is murder. So
this is what I'm saying they're afraid of.
In New York that we'll return to, but I'm telling you, I don't expect Roe v. Wade to be overthrown. Kavanaugh said he didn't expect to do it. As Susan Collins reported, as I have said, it gives every woman the right to choose. What could be more appropriate when you have a profound disagreement?
I agree with you, Jim. I agree, and I'm not trying to say that I agree with what what this possible, path would be. I'm not saying I agree with it just because I'm reporting it. I feel like I have to report that this is a possibility.
It's not going to. It's Roe v. Wade is not going to be overthrown. It would turn women into reproductive slaves.
Yeah, well,
having to carry to term an unwanted fetus, that's completely outrageous, un-American, undemocratic, grossly immoral.
Right.
And I will argue that in any venue one chooses. If someone wants to debate it with me, I'm here.
I agree. Then this violates the Constitution. Not the Constitution. This violates the Roe versus Wade Supreme Court precedent. What New York State did violates the federal law. Okay?
No, I haven't looked at it yet, but I will now. This will be a story we'll cover next week for sure.
That's my point of bringing it up, is that there's going to be constitutional challenges.
We'll go into it, Louisa.
Okay, yeah. It's a very important issue, but I think it's absolutely horrendous. Any woman deciding to abort in third trimester, minus any kind of, health, life.
No be done to preserve the health or the life of the mother. Now, here we have a very interesting series of developments. Kamala Harris announcing her presidential campaign. Frankly, I think she's a flyweight. This is an insignificant person. She destroyed any respect I might have had for her during the Kavanaugh hearings when she introduced a letter, an anonymous letter, claiming that Brett Kavanaugh and his friend had repeatedly raped a woman in the backseat of a car. It was absurd. It had no basis. She threw it into the hopper, discrediting herself. Before joining the Senate, Harris had made history as California's first African-American Attorney General in 2010. Before that, she served 2 terms as a district attorney for San Francisco. She's been a sharp critic of Trump and his policies. Many predicted for months she would join the field of Democrats. About a year before the Iowa caucuses, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren, New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, former Housing Secretary Julian Castro, Hawaiian Representative Tulsi Gabbard, and Maryland Representative John Delaney are among the other Democrats who have announced their candidacy. But get this. It looks as though Kamala Harris may not even be eligible to be president. What, have we finally learned something from Barack Obama? Right. Here, Jacob Wool tweets, Kamala Harris is not eligible to be president. Her father arrived from Jamaica in 1961, mother from India in 1960. Neither parent was a legal resident for 5 years prior to Harrison's birth, a requirement for naturalization. So this is very curious because since she was born in the United States, that seems to be contradicted by what we have here. Here's Kamala Harris's yearbook from Westmont High School in Montreal. Just like the worst president in American history, Barack Hussein Obama, Kamala Harris was not raised in the United States. Is it too much to ask to have a president who was born and raised in America? Where was she born? I think that becomes a question. Since her parents weren't American citizens at the time, if she was not born in the United States, then she probably is ineligible to run. Here we have revelations about Beto O'Rourke, who came out of nowhere wearing devil goat costume. Left-wing media tries to spin the narrative away from Satanism. Dave Hodges every now and then hits one out of the park. This is quite stunning. Celebrated left-wing political candidate Beto O'Rourke has been caught on video wearing the devil's goat costume, complete with what appears to be horns or ears as part of a bizarre mask and a freakish one-piece costume. He sported this outfit while performing on stage, raising questions about his ties to Satan worship. The media is now desperately trying to spin the emerging video as a comedy band gimmick, claiming the mask is a sheep mask, not the symbol of Baphomet, which is tied to Satanism and the occult. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to Stephen Colbert. I give a 0 Fs. The freshman congressman compared her activism to Martin Luther King Jr., who was also called divisive in his day, out of sheer modesty, of course. When Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez made a late-night debut last June on the Late Show with Stephen Colbert, she was the last guest of the night, following Michael Moore, comedian Eric Andre, and a special appearance by Jon Stewart 2 months later. The youngest woman elected to the House was the main event. Thanks to President Trump, the Bronx-born congresswoman is yet to be in office with the government fully open, meaning that she and her fellow freshman members can't start doing the work we're elected to do, she said. So the downside is that we're not able to get to work as much as we want to in the beginning, but the bright side is it gives us a lot more free time to make trouble. That trouble has included her hashtag Where's Mitch social media campaign to track down Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and try to force him a vote to reopen the government. Now she's been tapped to teach some more seasoned Democrats how to use platforms like Twitter and Instagram. Rule number one is to be authentic, to be yourself, and don't try to be anyone you're not, she told Colbert. So although this is a woman who was raised rich and pretends to be poor, so don't try to talk like a young kid if you're not a young kid. Don't post a memo if you don't know a meme if you don't know what a meme is. That was literally my advice, and I said don't talk like the founding fathers on Twitter. Ocasio-Cortez also reveals how she chooses to respond on Twitter, attempting to make sure she's not giving the wrong people undue attention. She tends to fire back at notable people or verified users because she doesn't want to go after some innocent bystander. She added, if you have a blue check, if you're in my mentions, if you're being sassy in a way I think is unjustified, if I haven't eaten in 2 to 3 hours, then watch out. Later, Colbert pressed her on some of the backlash she received from members of her own party who tell her to wait your turn and don't make waves. The host said, I want to ask this question in a respectful manner, knowing that you're from Queens. So you will understand this question on a scale from 0 to some. How many F's do you give? After thinking for a second, Ocasio-Cortez said, I think it's 0. I mean, this woman is an embarrassment. Here we have Tulsi Gabbard standing her ground on Syria, saying she doesn't regret meeting Assad. Democratic presidential challenger Tulsi Gabbard, who in my estimation is the only substantial person yet to declare that they're going to run for the Democratic nomination, has refused to budge on her anti-war views and to apologize for meeting Syrian President Bashar Assad in 2017, defending dialogue as the only alternative to more war. Anti-war congressman and Iraq veteran Gabbard, Democrat of Hawaii, was pilloried by mainstream media as well as the political establishment, both on the left and the right, for going on a privately funded fact-finding trip to Syria in January 2017, during which she visited Aleppo and met with President Assad. Gabbard was labeled an Assad apologist and Putin puppet, nicknames that have resurfaced after she announced her presidential bid earlier in January. But rather than announcing the perceived ills to rally some mainstream support, she told CNN's Jake Tapper on Sunday she did not regret her decision to speak face-to-face with Assad, who, I reiterate, is a democratically elected president of Syria. So, you know, how dumb are the American people to allow themselves to be played like this, Louisa?
Well, they're not paying attention. That's what I'm saying. How sad that we are so easily socially engineered, and people really don't see it for that because they really don't have the perspective, Jim, that there's a more global, that there's a nefarious, infiltration of government. They don't know about the deep state. Once they learn about the deep state, all this starts to make sense, in a bad way. But I mean, still, in any event, my point that I was making previously was regarding the whole abortion issue, because it's very profitable. You see, Abel Danger tweeted today that profiting from the harvesting of organs from babies in aborted hours before birth, they profited from adrenochrome extracted from aborted babies. This is crazy, man. This is satanic. This is crazy. There's people posting this information.
Louisa, abuses of the right to an abortion are abuses and ought not to be condoned. I agree with that. Just as a third trimester abortion, not to save the life or health of the mother, is murder and should be prosecuted. So we want to be wary of entangling, peripheral issues that are clear abuses with a woman's right to an abortion, which I support 100%.
In early term, right? In early term.
Well, the Supreme Court laid it out very clearly that in the first trimester, unrestricted. In the second trimester, the state can regulate how it's done. But in the third trimester, after the end of the 6 months of pregnancy, when viability has set in and the fetus could survive outside the intrauterine environment, abortions are only permissible to save the life or health of the mother and otherwise qualify as murder. That is what I endorse. That is Roe v. Wade.
I know, that's why this is so sick, what happened in New York State. I just can't get over it. And then, they had the nerve, Jim, of the new Freedom Tower, which it just doesn't surprise me. The new Freedom Tower was lit up in pink to celebrate the passing of the law.
What has the governor actually done in New York, Louisa? Can you spell it out?
No.
The abortion thing? Okay, well, we'll pick it up next week.
No,
We'll go into it in depth.
Like they were celebrating like it was something good. What on earth, people? What was New York thinking? I don't know what they were thinking. I don't know.
All right. Here we have Damascus threatens to respond to Israeli attack with strikes on Tel Aviv airport. The Israelis have actually conducted 200 strikes within Syria, claiming it was to take out the Iranian forces there, but they're totally unjustified. Here we have Russia. Israel must stop these spontaneous Syrian strikes. Russia has urged Israel to stop its spontaneous airstrikes on Syria days after the Israeli military carried out fresh airstrikes against targets near the Syrian capital of Damascus. We should prevent turning Syria, which has suffered over the past years of armed conflict, into an arena of settling geopolitical scores, added a spokeswoman for the Foreign Ministry of Russia. And we urge everyone to think about the possible consequences of causing more chaos in the Middle East. Why hasn't Syria used the S-300? Russia has provided with a very sophisticated anti-aircraft missile systems to Syria, which they apparently have not used yet, but I believe that it's likely they will be employed in the future. Russian Syrian media emphasize that Syrian air defense repelled the attack by Israel on Sunday, according to a spokesman for Russia's National Defense Management Center. The Syrian used the Pantsir and Buk air defense systems. Israel struck a Pantsir defense system in retaliation on Monday, but why wasn't the S-300, when Russia supplied to Syria in September, used by Damascus? The continued quiet among the S-300 gunners is a perplexing mystery that underpins the shadowy and deadly conflict unfolding in Syria's skies. In late September, Russia announced it would give the Syrian regime the S-300 system in the wake of Syrian air defense mistakenly shooting down a Russian Il-20. The Syrians had used an S-200 to hit the Russian plane, mistaking it for an Israeli airplane during an Israeli raid, and actually the Israelis used it to mask their involvement here. They set up the Russian plane, which did not endear them to Vladimir Putin. On October 2nd, Russia announced they had completed delivery of the S-300. 49 units of equipment, including radar control vehicles and launchers, were sent. New electronic warfare systems were also sent to Syria, including systems designed to control a near zone 50 kilometers from the system and far zone 200 kilometers away that would guard against Israeli attacks. Since the development of the S-300, there was a hiatus in attacks between October and late December. However, Syrian air defense was on alert, saying its radars were jammed on November 30th. This led to speculation that Syria's air defense system was tested several times between October and December. An airstrike on December 21st and then on January 12th were reported by the Syrian media. Syria said it was able to shoot down Israeli missiles on January 12th, yet 3 batteries of S-300s have apparently remained dormant. Part of the story can be realized from Russian media reports, which have emphasized the system was not used or have pointed to other older systems being used. Is this because Syrians are not trained on the system? All 3 battalions of S-300 systems were active by early November, Syria media indicated. Russian technical specialists completed the reconfiguration of the system to replace the Russian codes and letter frequencies to the letter codes and radars of Syrian ones. Observers of Syria note the issue is not that 300 is ineffective. One expert who tweets under the name Tomcat notes the priority of Syrian air defense is to integrate the majority of the projectiles to minimize risk to civilians in the surrounding suburbs. In this analysis, Syria's goal isn't to use the air defense to strike at Syrian jets. However, in the past, Syrian air defense projectiles have strayed toward Israel. In March 2017, an S-200 reportedly was fired and intercepted over the Jordan Valley by an Arrow missile. An F-16 returning from an airstrike was pursued by an S-200 missile in February and crashed in northern Israel. A Syrian missile headed for Israel was targeted by Israeli air defense on December 26. With the S-300 now in Syria, the question is, why hasn't it been used? Tomcat argues the S-300 is for theater defense against air-breathing targets like ballistic missiles and enemy planes, not for point defense like tonight, January 11th, and the previous times. In this analysis, Syrian air defense doesn't use the S-300 because it's not the right system to stop the kind of threat involved. The game will change when the S-300 is moved southward because then they can actually track and target the jets. Erdogan tells Trump Turkey is ready to take over Syria's Manbij. In a Sunday phone call between the two, Turkish President Erdogan told President Trump Turkey is ready to take over security in the Syrian city of Manbij, the site of a bombing last week that killed 4 U.S. troops, which I believe was also engineered, by the way, by the Mossad and the CIA to try to keep Trump into Syria. According to Turkish officials, Erdogan expressed the belief the bombing was done specifically to try to affect President Trump's decision to withdraw from Syria and said it should not impact U.S. plans. The White House version of the call didn't even mention this, nor the offer for Turkey to take over Manbij security. Instead, they said the two had agreed to continue to pursue a negotiated solution for northeast Syria that achieves our respective security concerns. Syria ceasefire on brink of collapse as Russia blames Turkey for terrorist growth. 4 months after Syria and Russia agreed to call off its joint attack on Al-Qaeda held Idlib province, opting amid U.S. threats to cut a ceasefire deal mediated with Turkey, Moscow now says Ankara has failed to live up to its end of the bargain, which includes agreeing to clear Idlib of terrorist and extremist groups. This means a joint Syrian army-Russia assault on Idlib could again be on the horizon, which was a major source of transition and threats with the United States previously in September. Russia has accused Turkey of not living up to its promise. The extremist group Hayat Tahrir al-Shami, HTS, is the rebranded coalition dominated by former Nasra Front militants, which is Syrian al-Qaeda. Russia has called the situation rapidly deteriorating, and the week promised to growing numbers of ceasefire violations, incidents, and threats against Russia's Hmeimim air base in Syria. Russia's foreign minister said 65 people have been killed, more than 200 injured, and more than 1,000 recorded breaches of the agreement. This despite Erdogan previously agreeing to keep militants away from 15 to 20 kilometer deep buffer zone established between HTS and pro-Damascus forces. This suggests that the situation in Syria is far from being resolved, but that the efforts to keep Trump there have not been working out, where Russia is going to manage the situation with Turkey and with the assistance of the Iranians, it appears.
Well, it's a little late. It's about time, don't you think? It's like, why have they waited so long?
I know.
You'd think, I don't know what's going on there, but you'd think that would have, happened a little bit sooner. Oh, by the way, I just wanted to, I don't know what point I was trying to make regarding the other, yes, we know that Ruth Bader Ginsburg would have to be replaced. So I'm sorry, just scratch that I said what I was talking about, replacing yet another one. I was hearing that there was going to be yet another one, but I could be wrong, and I'm not going to go out and speculate. So just scratch that.
Well, the fact is, to have a replacement Ruth Bader Ginsburg is going to initiate a political World War III, Louisa.
Well,
because she was the most hard left member of the court. Kennedy was a bit of a swing vote, and Kavanaugh was viewed as somewhat of a centralist, so preference to the right. So that made a minor shift to the right. Replacing Ginsburg with a Trump appointee, however, completely changes the character of the Supreme Court. That's why this is going to be titanic, and it's another reason why the Democrats, I believe, are now engaged in a plot to assassinate the President of the United States.
Well, pretty soon the Supreme Court's going to be ruthless. Sorry, that was a pun. That was a joke.
That's right.
but I'm sorry, we have to lay this up sometime.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
It'll be ruthless. It'll be ruthless.
We also have events in the vicinity of Ukraine where the Kerch Strait. This is fascinating. 2 ships have caught fire moving through the Kerch Strait, separating Crimea from mainland Russia. One was apparently rocked by an explosion. At least 10 sailors have died. The crews of the affected ships included Turkish and Indian nationals. The emergency services said there were no Russian sailors involved. Turkey confirmed 16 of its citizens were aboard the affected vessels. Both were carrying the Tanzania flags. One of them was a liquefied natural gas carrier. Another was a tanker. The fire broke out as the 2 ships were transferring fuel from one to the other. Here we have the Taliban killing at least 126 Afghan police in an attack near Kabul. This is rather stunning. In one of the deadliest attacks in recent memory in Afghanistan, the Taliban has attacked the police training campus in Wardak province, just southwest of the capital city, Kabul. Officials have confirmed at least 126 killed, mostly police, but also 8 commandos. Taliban has rejected a call to meet U.S. negotiators in Islamabad. While the Pakistani media were reporting on Friday a deal was in place to host the next round of Afghan peace talks in Istanbul, the Taliban was quick to correct the record over the weekend, saying they have no intention of taking part in those talks. Talks between the U.S. and Taliban have been on a rough footing, with U.S. requests for long-term bases in post-war Afghanistan angering negotiators, as the previous condition was a U.S. pullout. In Iraq, lawmakers pushed for a timeline for the U.S. to get out of Iraq. December's announcement of U.S. pullout of troops from Syria set a lot of discussion in motion, but in neighboring Iraq, it brought focus to ongoing discussions on the presence of U.S. troops inside Iraq. This is already a major political issue within Iraq, with several parties seeking a firm government timetable on a U.S. withdrawal, since the Abdel Mahdi government has been clear on the war against ISIS being over. Since Syria shows U.S. can actually leave a country, this has brought the question into laser focus. South Korea warns troop talks deadlocked and U.S. demands for more funding. Trump administration hit South Korea with sudden unacceptable demands. Now, this is Mike Pompeo and John Bolton working mischief around the world. Negotiation between the Trump administration and South Korean government on funding for the large U.S. force present on the Korean Peninsula has been deadlocked in recent weeks. With 10 rounds of talks failing to reach a deal, the Pentagon is now warning Korean workers they may be placed on leave in mid-April if a deal isn't in place. South Korea provides substantial funding for the U.S. troops in their country, paying $848 million annually under the now expired deal. This was estimated to be roughly half the overall talks. Trump has been pushing for massively more than that. This is embarrassingly bad, but I'm telling you, those neocons are doing damage to Trump's foreign policy.
Yeah, well, it's still, a war. I mean, within the administration itself. So, he's trying to root them out, but he's doing it slowly because they are losing control of the financial system. And, this whole Khazarian mafia that Benjamin Fulford talks about. But I also wanted to, just to mention that Trump just recently nominated 51 judges at once to fill 1/3 of all court vacancies. Now, that's on the federal level, and that's also circuit courts and also military commission, one military commission. So we have a lot of changes going on. The problem I have is the president wants to reduce government, and he wants to put the power back in the hands of the state. I understand the federal government needed to have a good cleaning, but the states are, I don't know. I think the corruption is spread just as far and wide on the state levels in the state courts.
Well, Louisa, Trump's most enduring legacy may turn out to be the judiciary by appointing so many constitutionally oriented judges in place of democratically appointed activists who want to make law from the bench.
How about that, Jim? A constitutionally oriented judge. What a novel idea today, huh?
This is rather fascinating, Louisa. Ought to bother every American. Science has proven fluoride is a neurotoxin that harms children, so why are states and local governments still poisoning the public water supply? Mm-hmm. A recent study published in the journal The Lancet, which is the most noted medical journal in the world, out of the UK, recommended fluoride be classified a developmental neurotoxin, a substance destructive to the brain, nervous system, and spinal cord before birth and during infancy, along with arsenic, mercury, toluene, and lead. More than 50 peer-reviewed studies, moreover, have linked the consumption of fluoridated water to lower IQ in children. A joint meta-analysis by Harvard School of Public Health and China Medical University, which examined 27 studies on the subject, found strong indication that fluoride may adversely affect cognitive development in children. Moreover, the body has a natural protective membrane called the blood-brain barrier, which prevents dangerous substances like aluminum from entering the brain. However, when aluminum comes into contact with fluoride, it's able to cross that barrier in the form of aluminum fluoride. Numerous studies have linked the presence of aluminum fluoride to the development of Alzheimer's disease. There's a murky history of water fluoridation where Mike Adams of Natural News has done a great deal to reveal what's going on. As reported by Children's Health Defense, during World War II, fluoride began to be produced on a large scale as part of the Manhattan Project responsible for the development of the atomic bomb. Declassified government documents revealed scientists on the project determined fluoride posed a serious health threat to bomb program workers and communities. In a bid to prevent wholesale panic about this toxic chemical, the government embarked on a propaganda campaign to convince the public of its ability to prevent tooth decay. The government backed its own propaganda with a series of flawed scientific trials to confirm what had already been declared as fact. Then in 1950, the U.S. Public Health Service announced water fluoridation was official public health policy, advising communities to start fluoridating water to prevent tooth decay. Although the government has continued to insist fluoride is safe and effective, the science is conclusive. Fluoride is dangerous and ineffective, and the government urgently needs to stop mandating its addition to our water supply. Here's another bizarre contradiction of science. Nobel Prize-winning DNA pioneer James Watson, stripped of titles for insisting race and IQ are linked. 90-year-old Nobel Prize-winning scientist James Watson, currently in a nursing home, unable to defend himself as a result of recent debilitating car accidents, has been run through the ringer for refusing to renounce his statement that race and genes are linked to IQ, while having initially issued an apology allowing him to maintain his honorary titles. Asked more than a decade later whether his views about race and intelligence have changed, he told the PBS documentary they have not at all. I would like for them to have changed, that there be new knowledge that says your nurture is much more important than nature, meaning environment more important than genes. He was quoted as saying in a recently previewed PBS documentary entitled American Masters Decoding Watson, there's a difference on the average between blacks and whites on IQ tests. I would say the difference is genetic. The fact is, I've studied this issue. I published a whole book about the evolution of intelligence, principally about whether humans are the only animals with minds. I deal extensively with the nature of intelligence and IQ studies, and there's a clear difference. There are like 23 different racially discernible groups, and there are differences in IQ. For example, it turns out the group with the highest average scores on IQ tests are Jewish. Those with the lowest are blacks from Africa. The range is from about, as I recall, maybe 118 maybe among the Jewish group, but around 80 for the African. I mean, the science is undeniable, and it's incredibly stupid for public policies to be based without looking at the evidence. As a token of my affection and esteem for James Watson, a great scientist, I have sent him a complimentary inscribed copy of The Evolution of Intelligence, Louisa.
Well, Jim, you know, that's a politically incorrect statement to make. But, you know, look, I mean, science is science. And, you know, I would be very curious, though,
Louisa, I'm a philosopher of science, for crying out loud. I taught critical thinking, logic, scientific reasoning, scientific thinking.
I'm not questioning you, Jim.
No, the point I'm making, Louisa, is it's insulting to the American people to propagate myths. All people are not born equal. That is an ideal under the law. All persons should be treated equally under the law with the same dispassionate disposition with regard to due process before the state can deprive you of life, liberty, or property. In this case, James Watson has been deprived of distinctions he well deserved and earned on the basis of ideological dogmas that bear no relationship to scientific evidence.
I agree, Jim. I agree, and it's very interesting to see what and how those studies were conducted in terms of. And I, you know, just as a member of Sigma Xi, I'd like to take a look at those studies myself. I was trained very well in looking at the study, how the studies were constructed and what the variables were, because quite honestly, you have a huge cultural difference. There's such a huge cultural difference between the natives in Africa and Jews, and the culture of.
Do you understand evolution, Louisa? That the environments make a huge difference. I identify 8 different mechanisms of evolution, including 6 different generators of genetic difference and 4 different generators of genetic difference and 4 different mechanisms of selection, Louisa. It's easily explicable why this should be the case from an evolutionary point of view. And frankly, I challenge anyone who wants to dispute it to debate me about it. Read my book. I document it thoroughly.
Okay, I think so. You're saying that nature overrides nurture. Is that what
Of
you're saying?
course. The studies with the identical twins show that our personality traits, our character, our intellect, and so forth are approximately 60% determined genetically, 40% environmentally based on experience. That is a well-established study based on identical twins separated at birth.
All right, Jim.
I go through
Jim,
all of this in the book. I mean,
I know, Jim. I've heard that. I heard it was reversed. That it was. Look, so what are you starting with? You're not starting with an equal. This is a very serious debate, Jim, and I want to be respectful about it, and I hope you would be respectful about it as well. I understand the conclusions you came to. I want to see how the studies. I want to see how these things were done, because I think that we have.
Go ahead and look at how the studies are done, Louisa. What do you think?
Yeah.
I didn't take into account all the claims about the bias of these tests, for crying out loud. This is a hot topic. I'm telling you, I've done my homework on it.
Okay, Jim, but other people, Jim,
and this is a political attack on him when he's standing up for science and for truth and for evidence. It's just outrageous.
I know, Jim, but don't attack me, Jim, because Jim, I have a right to my opinion too, and I have a right to review the information because
you have the right to be wrong. That's just fine with me, Louisa.
I understand, Jim, but you do too. So I don't want to get into.
Yeah, well, look, Louisa,
but I'm not saying that you're wrong. The problem is you're not giving me my opinion. So that's the problem.
After publishing around 40 books, Louisa.
Jim,
I'm dealing with a lot of ideologically based criticism. I have a very lack of tolerance for ideology in scientific context.
Yeah.
I invite you, get a copy of the book and go through it. There are used copies available. They're not expensive. And give me your take. I would welcome it.
No, I need to question it. That's all I need to do, Jim, is question it. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying I want to take a review because when I know the cabal, let me tell you why. When I know that the cabal puts up the money for these, how much of the research is actually fake that's been published in Lancet, in Nature, in all these big publications. I'm just saying that there's financial motivation to make a study what it is. And that's why you review and you analyze the study to make sure it's reproducible.
And it's my obligation as a philosopher of science to counteract biases in research. That's what I do, Louisa.
Okay.
This is what I do. All right? Check it out. I welcome your study. I introduce it because the evidence is on the side of James Watson, and it's overwhelming.
All right, let's move on, Jim. Let's move on. I'm not going to sit here and argue about this because I just need you to
I know all about biased studies, Louisa.
Okay, but you got to stop interrupting me and let me have my opinion. I have a right to it, Jim.
Of course. You want to go ahead? Here, let's go back and you state your opinion right now. State it.
Jim, I said I have to look at the studies because from what I've researched, what I have studied, what I know from psychology is that we have recessive genes that can be turned on. There's a whole lot that can be changed within that I don't think IQ is as fixed as people are saying. And I need to look in that. I need to look at the research studies, how they're designed and what they're looking at. And I can't do that within 5 minutes, Jim, but I can tell you.
Of course, I didn't suggest you would.
I can tell you that they're, and it may be the case, but I'm saying that you can't attack people because they want to question this, okay?
I did not.
It's not a personal attack. Well, you did attack me, and it was a personal attack. It was very personal.
The point I was making is the evidence supports James Watson, and I've actually published about it. That's my point. I know a great deal about this subject. Now, here we have a man using Instagram to threaten relatives of the Parkland shooting. A lot of these incidents are fabricated. They're made up to try to derive sympathy for alleged events that are perpetrated by the deep state. Parkland, a California man, is accused of using Instagram to harass and intimidate some of the relatives and friends of the 17 people killed at the Valentine's Day shooting at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, except nobody died in Parkland. They sent the kids home at 1 p.m. There are 3,500 kids they sent home at 1 p.m. because it was a holiday. They only kept behind a few dozen. I have gone through this in great detail. I have a whole book about it at moonrockbooks.com with a dozen or more contributors. This guy confessed to targeting activists as a troll to gain popularity. He was a fan of serial killer Ted Bundy. This is all manufactured stuff. This is propaganda. Here we have an article from Spiked About the Truth about Parkland that is impugning the police for not responding, the sheriff's deputies, as an act of cowardice, but it had nothing to do with it. They weren't snapped in that it was a drill. We've had police in SWAT gear who were using a sim gun to fire simulated ammunition made out of beeswax and laundry detergent because it was a fake shooting. It was a part and parcel of a DMC perpetrating a scam on the American people. Here are 2 frames from a 52-second video we have from Live Leaks inside a classroom, where you see girls screaming their best to make it sound as though they're concerned. Another, however, worried about her bottled water, another on her iPod, a kid pulling his pud. Then you turn and you see there's what's supposed to be a body lying on the floor, but it's a training dummy with no head and no arms and a pool of fake blood. And you have persons in police uniforms rushing in and out, and you think, wow, the Parkland police were really Johnny on the spot, except Parkland gave up its police force in 2004 to save money. These were actors in police uniforms. Here you can find it, the Parkland puzzle, how the pieces fit together. Go to moonrockbooks.com. We document this in spades, Louisa, in spades. And now we have YouTube is going to crack down on conspiracy videos. The site is to stop recommending blatantly false videos. How do they know what's false and what's true? They're going to censor anyone who tells you the truth about Parkland because they don't want you to know the truth. It's just disgusting beyond belief. This is Big Brother. This is paternalism. This is them dictating what you're allowed to think and talk about, Louisa, very much on the order of what we have about race and IQ, frankly.
I know, Jim, and I kind of, look, I think that, I think just so our viewers know, we get a little heated there, but the idea is that, I respect your expertise, or I wouldn't do reports with you, Jim, but at the same time, I don't believe IQ is fixed, just based on information and research I've done. I don't think it's fixed. Well,
it depends what you mean by fixed, Louisa. It's genetically based, and there are clear differences in average IQ among different racial groups that are determined by their DNA. I go through this all very extensively in great detail.
I understand, Jim, but you can't attack me because I'm questioning. Because if you're doing it, but Jim,
I love that you're questioning, Louisa.
I know. I'm just saying.
You're questioning.
Let me finish. Let me finish.
I think you're going to fall into the same ideological claptrap that we get from the Democrats and those who espouse political correctness.
We have to question things. And my point is that if you're basing this on studies, I mean, if you're not the one doing the DNA analysis, then you're basing it on someone else's research. And all I'm saying is that research needs to be scrutinized. That's my point. That's my point. It needs to be very scrutinized. And that's what I'm trained in, is scrutinizing research studies, okay, and design
that's
of
what I was doing too. I was scrutinizing all the research on race and intelligence, okay? Check it out.
Not a problem. It's just my nature to have to question these things.
Give us your critique, Louisa. I would love it. In fact, I'll track down a copy of the book and I'll send it to you. So
I want to see the actual studies and how they were conducted. And I want to see that the DNA analysis was I want to see how it was done. I want to see how they extracted it. I mean, everything from soup to nuts.
Look. There are all kinds of ways.
I'm just telling you how I like to analyze these studies.
There are all kinds of ways of identifying racial groups. Morphology, that is to say, your principal physical features are all racially determined. You can have excellent studies based on morphological differences that are substantiated by further DNA studies. I talk about all this, Louisa. Now, here we have John Simpson calling for a reinvestigation of American assassination. He's talking about JFK, Robert F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King. But the problem is the government can't reinvestigate because the government was implicated in all of those with the possible exception of Malcolm X. It was my suspicion, for example, this is an illustration from the Zapruder film. It was my suspicion those who were involved in reconstructing the whole movies of the assassination, including the Zapruder film, might have overlooked frames past 313, 316 that display the wound to the back of the head. I found this image of the blowout in frame 374. And I published it in my book, The Great Zapruder Film Hoax. Here we have Virginia's governor with an anti-gun package, which is straight up confiscation. This is completely outrageous. And yet, interestingly, The Virginia Senate has passed a controversial bill that would make it easier to bring guns into places of worship, which is a move in the right direction. When they confiscate guns from law-abiding citizens, they leave free fire zones for the criminals who aren't going to give up their guns. And I say, none of us should be giving up our guns. Here we have new developments in the Sandy Hook lawsuit, a request for admission from plaintiff Leonard Posner. Go to my blog and check it out. I'm getting a very positive response about what I'm doing, the questions I'm asking Leonard Posner. Some are dumbfounded. And of course, you can go to Moonrock Books and you can learn everything you want to know about all these major events, from Sandy Hook to the Boston bombing to Orlando and Dallas to Charlottesville and now Parkland. And finally, I close by observing where followers have created this image of words I've said on many occasions. When they come for our guns, the time has come to use them.
Thanks, Jim. What is the update, Jim? Where are you in terms of, is there any motions or anything that has transpired at this point?
Well, I'm in discovery, Louisa. That's the first.
Well, I know, but has there been any comments or anything interesting happening in discovery?
Go to my blog. There are lots of interesting comments. This is stirring up quite a lot because I'm getting into the nitty-gritty. But just read the questions I'm asking, putting to the man who calls himself Lenny Posner, and you'll see how fraudulent is the whole case.
Okay, so I was just asking for an update. I was asking if you could give the viewers just a little bit of an update as to any development since your initial response to the court.
Yes, I've submitted a request for admissions from Lenny Posner. This is a part of discovery, Louisa.
Okay, that's an important thing. A request for admissions.
This is the next stage. I put 30 questions to him. All you have to do is read through the 30 questions. And as exhibits, I have 6 different death certificates. You ought to review all this because, look, it blows the whole, just this document alone blows the whole case apart. If you don't know anything about Sandy Hook, if you want to understand what's going on, just go to that blog. Just read that one blog and you'll see the big picture.
No, I don't mind following this in detail. I think we should do another report, just a follow-up on what you're talking about.
We can do that.
Yeah, just because it's important to get into the details. Like I'm talking about, I'm talking about details. And
we can go through the blog. You got it, Louisa.
Yeah, just so people know, folks. And when I'm talking about scrutinizing research design, I'm talking about when you take a sample size, okay? When you take your samples that you're going to use to base your report on, are you taking equitable samples? How equal are they in comparison? Like, for instance, if you're taking a sample gene study from a person who lives in an indigenous tribe versus a gene sample versus like a upper class educated family, there's what my point is that they're not going to show the same intelligence, because how do you know? For instance, this is why the IQ tests and SATs are biased, because you ask questions to people who aren't familiar with concepts that you're talking about because they don't exist in your culture. This is how these tests have always been biased, and they've been biased to show that certain nationalities or ethnicities
that would make
not
sense,
smart.
Louisa, if there weren't non-biased tests that have to do with hand-eye coordination and so forth, which is correlated with intelligence. You give exactly the same results. What you're saying would make sense if there were dozens and dozens of tests, all of which lead to the same conclusion. I review all this data, so for God's sake, do me the kindness of looking at what I published there before you start critiquing it. We all know what you have been saying is true. We all know it's true, Louisa.
You don't have to shout, Jim. Don't shout at me because that's disrespectful. I'm trying to be respectful about the reason why I'm questioning this, and I'm not questioning you or your book because I haven't read it yet, Jim. I'm just saying that these are the kinds of things people should look at, not just regarding this issue, but regarding any issue that's supposedly science-backed, because they don't all come to the same kinds of conclusions. They don't always come out, a lot of times they, look, I get these briefs all the time from Sigma Xi that, talk about, where all this funding is going from the National Institutes of Health, and it's all to promote these agendas of, that aren't good for humanity. So I'm just saying we need to question everything.
Of course. That's what I do. That's what philosophers do. That's what philosophers of science do. They question everything.
Right,
and they are in the position of seeking to determine whether it's good science or bad science. That's what I do, Louisa. That's what I do.
Being respectful, Jim. Okay,
I
let's
love
wrap
it.
this
I
up.
think you're wonderful.
Let's wrap this up.
I'm going to send you the book.
Sparring with Jim Fetzer today. Still love you, Jim.
I love you too. You're wonderful.
Okay, let's just get it out. We're both after the love of science. So honest to God, it's, whatever the facts are, at the end of the day, they are.
That's right.
There's nothing greater than scrutinizing a research study from A to Z, soup to nuts, and that's that's what I was really particularly trained in.
Yes.
They kind of made a monster out of me. Okay.
I agree completely.
Okay, I had really good education on that. Okay, so Jim, thank you so much. It's been an incredible look, folks. If you want to help Jim with his legal defense fund, please go to moonrockbooks.com and go there and click on the yellow, still yellow, isn't that right?
Yeah.
And help Jim with his legal defense fund for the Sandy Hook. He's doing this on behalf of everybody. So everybody has to do their part somehow. And also, folks, you can go and support, please continue to support GoldFish Report so we can stay and we can continue bringing this.
By the way, right above my head is the book, The Great Zapruder Film Hoax, where I published first discovery in frame 374. You can see the blowout. It came out in 2003.
Yeah.
2003.
So I really want to follow this. So we're going to publish another report.
Louisa, we'll do it. We'll do it.
Follow up on what's going on with Jim's lawsuit and this discovery, because this might be the catalyst, Jim, that blows this whole thing open. So we'll hope so. We can end this fake media, fake news. So folks, we'll see you next week for another POTUS report, Jim. It's going to be an interesting week. Hopefully we'll get a State of the Union sometime between now and then. So you have a great day, Jim. Thanks, and we'll see you all next week. This concludes this edition of the GoldFish Report.